Hi everyone, and welcome to my continued coverage of the Tal Memorial 2013. It's now been finished a couple of weeks, and Boris Gelfand, surprisingly to some, won it in style with a 6 out of 9. But there were some great games, and I had a look at one before, so I thought we'd have a look at a couple more before going back to Nimzovich or some other stuff. The game I thought we'd look at today was Fabiano Caruana with white against Hikaru Nakamura with black in round 6. So Caruana opened with e4, to which Naka answered c5, the Sicilian defense, which is fairly standard for him against e4. Play continued with the mainline Najdorf variation. Knight f3, d6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, and a6. The Najdorf, of course, is both one of the most popular and most complex openings available in chess, and the amount of theory and variations is astronomical. The idea of playing a6 is to prevent bishop b5 check, which is annoying if instead of a6 black plays e5 immediately. It also stops the knights going to b5, and often black's going to move his e-pawn, and d6 becomes a weakness, so knight b5 would be logical, a lot of the time. And also with this move, black is preparing b5, b4, kicking the knight, and then knight takes e4. And many lines of the Sicilian, white will be castling queenside, and therefore it's logical to start pushing these pawns, minority attack. Caruana, who has huge opening knowledge, now took the game into something of a sideline with f3, although this move features in many of the main lines. Bishop e3 is usually played first. So Caruana plays f3 to prevent knight g4, it's, kicking the bishop, and also just bolstering the e4 pawn, and keeping everything solid and harmonious for white. So Nakamura continued with e5 in the true spirit of the Najdorf. The supposed refutation of playing f3 on the 6th move is queen b6, where white has some problems to solve in order to develop safely. Presumably this line didn't appeal to Naka. So e5 and knight b3, and this is the best square. Black's move e5 has fatally weakened the d5 square, and he's now threatening to play knight d5 and start using it straight away. Another of the benefits of playing f3 is to bolster e4, and knight d5 could be met with knight takes e4. So Naka played bishop e6, and white will have to recapture with a pawn if he plays knight d5, and obviously having a pawn there is a lot less of a problem than having a piece there for black. Caruana continued with bishop e3, which is the best square for the bishop as well. This move a6 weakens permanently the b6 square, and this move aims to take advantage of that, amongst other things. White can follow up with queen d2 and castle long if he wants a really sharp game. Naka now played h5, which he plays in many lines of the Sicilian, and which the engines don't like. His point, I believe, is that white often wants to play g4 in order to accelerate his kingside attack, and this move slows that down considerably. It's a little weakening for the black kingside, but it's nothing too serious just yet. Fritz prefers d5 immediately, claiming equality after these exchanges, but it's hard to see grandmasters giving up the bishop pair so willingly. Okay, so h5, and now queen d2. And white's following the standard plan in Sicilian setups. So knight bd7, normal development. In the Najdorf, black should generally play his knight to d7 and then c5 instead of c6. So he can also play b5 and knight b6, and then that will support d5 push. So now Caruana planted his knight in the d5 outpost, and Naka was happy to exchange it off. Knight takes d5, and after e takes d5, he has only one move, bishop f5, but this is a good move because it's pressuring c2, and this is a target for black in the Sicilian. On top of that, he now only has to deal with the pawn on the d5 square, which, as I said, is preferable to a piece. Despite that, white enjoys a comfortable edge here with more space and more flexibility than black. Caruana now developed his bishop to e2, presumably having something against bishop d3, which is what the engines liked. And Naka increased the pressure now with rook c8, intensifying the pressure on c2. Caruana answered calmly with rook c1, so no castling long, so it's going to be a quieter variation of the Sicilian. And Naka now threw in a check with queen h4. Caruana didn't mind playing g3s, kicking the queen to f6, and now Caruana castled. So Naka has to develop his bishop to castle, so bishop e7. And having completed development, Caruana now set about making some threats of his own, with knight a5, attacking b7, but more importantly, the c6 square, meaning that if black ever tries to expand on the queen side with b5, then knight c6 is going to be a very nice outpost. And this is the beginning of a plan of squashing black on the queen side, which seems to have promise at the moment. So Naka defended b7 with his rook, and now Caruana played bishop d3, and Nakamura took the opportunity to castle. He could have also played bishop h3, where rook f2 is forced, and Fritz again claims equality here. And obviously now exchanging the bishops is bad. If bishop takes d3, c takes d3, unveils an attack on the rooks, forces rook takes c1, so queen takes c1, and there's no way for black to hold b7, and the white queen is very strong on the c file. Playing b5 is outright blunder. Queen c8 check, bishop d8, queen takes a6, and black's queen side falls apart. So Nakamura castled. Okay, so now Caruana plays c4, which cements this d5 pawn and begins this queenside attack. So Naka now exchanged bishops, and after queen takes b3 he played rook e8, intending some later play on the e file and also supporting this bishop, because there was an idea here of playing e4, discovering an attack on b2. So after queen takes e4, queen takes b2, the bishop is hanging, so rook e8 makes this idea possible. So rook e8 and now b4 from Caruana rules it out altogether. And this also rules out knight c5, which Nakamura may have liked to play at some point. So he now unveiled the rook with bishop f8, and Caruana answered with the rook c e1. And you know, given the knight here on a5, black may have wanted to play e5 as a pawn sack and then knight e5 afterwards, in a manner that we've been recently looking at in my system, sacrificing the pawn for activity. Although at the moment it of course doesn't work due to the queen facing the rook on f6 and rook here on f1, so there'll be a discovered attack. But the idea is still there. So Naka now played g6, solidifying his king side and waiting to see how Caruana will answer. He did so with queen d2, perhaps aiming for a later trade of the dark squared bishops. And Naka gladly took over the light squares with his queen. And this is also prophylaxis against any g4 ideas and allows knight f6, so it's a great all-round move. Caruana continued on the queen side with a4, safe in the knowledge that black can never try and disrupt this play without weakening the c6 square. Naka, for his part, now got his knight to a better post. Knight f6, but the knight from d7 was defending b6, so now bishop b6 is possible, and rook c8, and now f4 from Caruana. And it's important to note, knight takes b7, it drops the c pawn, and black is better. Also possible is rook b8, where white can try knight takes d6, bishop takes d6, and c5, and he has great compensation for the piece. He has 2 pawns already for the knight, and the 4-to-1 pawn majority is going to be a serious problem for black to deal with. So f4 anyway, and Naka answered with e4, which is pretty much forced and consistent with his previous plays, with the rook e8 and the knight and the queen all supporting the square. And this pawn is a nuisance for white to deal with. It's restrictive for the pieces, and just creates a thorn in the side kind of thing. Advancing it though has weakened d4, so bishop d4 is possible, and this gets the bishop to a great square in the center, and also renews the pressure on b7. So Naka played rook c7. Okay, that's the end of part 1.